Welcome to the House Concert Interview. I'm your host, Richard Sherman, and today's guest is Matti Joy Puccio. Matti, welcome, and I'm absolutely delighted to have you as my guest.
I'm delighted to be here as your guest.
It's my understanding that you are a performer, a songwriter, and educator. Can you tell us something about your musical background?
Well, I grew up in Branson, Missouri, which is absolutely steeped in Americana folk music. And from a young age, I learned classical piano and singing and was in all sorts of church plays. And I was fortunate that music started young in Missouri. So I took up brass in middle school. Then I moved to Texas, and I picked up my first secondhand guitar at 16, and ended up going to college for music, and settled on being a vocal education major and a piano performance minor. And, hop, skip, and a jump up here to Bend, and I decided to start pursuing performance. Bigger slice of the pie out of those three.
When you were developing the musical interests, did you realize fairly quickly the talent that you had? I mean, to be doing what you're doing and then for schooling in that way, obviously there's talent. At what point did you realize that you had a gift that not everybody does?
I think pretty young, honestly. I had a lot of peer role models in performance in Branson, and like I mentioned before, there were a lot of like church plays and such, and also doing theater and choir, and I always had this little voice in the back of my head that was like, you could go for it. And then I also got that echoed by a really supportive family who was like, you should record. My dad was always telling me, you should go on American Idol, or you should go on all these little shows. And I was like, no. I just want to play quiet. I just want to play quiet, delicate guitar music in a cafe.
Were there other family members that had musical talent, identified as such?
A lot of our family members took up music. I think that I am the first person to really pursue it as like a full part of my career, and I want to say that is due in no small part to how accessible it has become in our day and age to just do it yourself. It's pretty wild how much you can do with say a whole year of just practicing guitar.
Yeah. So when you went to college, was it Texas A&M, do I recall?
Mm-hmm.
Did you go started as a music major?
I did, and I was fortunate to go to a community college at the beginning. They were really excellent about letting someone like me, who perhaps has, some deficit of attention, to kind of I want to be a piano major. I want to be a French horn major. I want to be a voice major. I want to be a piano minor. And it was, it's a. I think our band had like 30 people in it, and there were only like 5 music majors. So they just like, sure. Oh, you want to be a guitar major? I was like, maybe not. But yeah. So. Yeah, I kind of bounced around for a bit, and I eventually settled on voice with a piano minor.
And then when you graduated, when you left school, did you immediately get into the music scene, or were there other areas that you pursued first?
I will say that moments ago I said that, it's so easy these days, but there is still that hurdle of like breaking into a scene. Played a couple exposure gigs, but for the most part I was teaching. I was really leaning on the real job, as it were.
And what would you say your emphasis is now with the different aspects of music?
I think I'm really viewing it as seasonal more than anything else. Over the winter, everybody wants to stay inside and pick up an instrument, so I oblige them, and I teach them guitar and piano and singing, and as the sun starts to come back out, I'm pursuing more performances, and I'd say it's probably 60-40 performance and teaching, because I've never practiced so much than when I'm teaching littles who are rapidly approaching, especially when it comes to things like drum set or piano, where it's like, oh, okay, yeah, so I need to stay ahead of you just like a little bit, so, yeah.
What ages of children do you teach?
I teach,
what's the range?
I've taught from 6 to 66. I teach all ages, and it's really, really enriching to encounter people at all stages of their musical journey.
For the youngest ones, are you able to fairly quickly identify those with the real talent, or are there some that, as you see them progress, there's more there than you may have realized at the beginning?
I struggle a little bit with the whole concept of talent, because I think that music is the divine birthright of all human beings. I think that my vocal teachers would be proud of me for saying that we're all born with an instrument in us. And somewhere down the line, somebody somewhere tells you that, ooh, that doesn't sound good. And getting to be the person that shares with someone that quantifying of musical skill is deeply rooted in long established oppressive traditions, is just so it's savory to have a moment where somebody who thinks that they can't sing, or somebody who's like, I don't have rhythm. It's like, can you just say 1, 2, 3, 4 for me? And then they do. I was like, sweet, that's a beat. Like, yeah. And then it's just, it's all about where people start. And I really believe that they're only limited by how far they're willing to go and how much support they have from the people around them in getting there. So as far as identifying talent, yes, I have this amazing 12-year-old who self-recorded and released a single this last month, and yeah, she started real strong. And I have other people that are, still getting that E minor chord, and it's fine. And you just have to keep up that sort of unconditional positive regard, if you've ever heard that. I try to bring that.
I bet it's equally satisfying to you, not only those that have advanced skills, but those who may have gone in very tentatively, but then get the confidence to be who they want to be musically in ways they never expected to be able to. And that's got to be as satisfying as anything.
This is difficult, but you're doing great. I heard that. I heard this. And well done. Next time try and, be forward in the front. All the little things, like, just just build them up.
Yeah.
There's no limit.
Yeah. And so you do the teaching, obviously, and now you're doing the performance too. And based on our earlier correspondence, you mentioned the tradition of how politically charged folk music has been, and that it's this tradition that you're wanting to continue. And so my question is, how does this tradition inform your music and songwriting?
Well, I look back at artists like Bob Dylan and Woody Guthrie. Woody Guthrie especially is a personal hero of mine. And I look at the subject matter that they wrote about, and then I go back and I read some history books, and I'm like, that was the right side. And I think about, what were they doing? Who were they affiliating with? Who were they listening to? Whose stories were they amplifying? And then I turn on the TV and I turn on the the Reddit and scroll and look and consume the information, and I look for those. I look for the still, quiet voice that says, we are here to help people. And so it's required a lot of deep examination of my upbringing, of the phrases that I grew up hearing, of all of that, and then reconciling that with a deeply Christian upbringing that I'm reconstructing into something that is true and kind and helpful. And then I jump out of bed at 11:30 p.m. and I've got to write down this story about someone who got taken to federal court for leaving water in the desert. And how that got, it was ruled that it was a constitutionally protected exercise of religion. And it's like, more people need to know about these things.
Mm-hmm. For some of those politically charged themes that grab you, obviously there's so much going on in the world today that can be spoken to and about and have the light shined on. Are there certain themes, are there certain areas that you've been particularly drawn to speak out about and against, if you will?
Yeah, I am deeply passionate about the abolition of oppressive systems. And I'm just going to be frank here, I have to go back and rewrite some songs and re-record some songs, because sometimes I think about things like the continued slavery of political and racial figures via a privatized prison system, and I get really bitter and cynical about it, and I just want to scream, and I just want to say, well, that's how it is, and here's how that's, I guess, well, that's not what we need at all. It is, I think as an artist I have a responsibility to dream big and dream to point to something. I need to be idealistic about what we can achieve. Because if I won't, who will? So when it comes to things like growing food insecurity, when it comes to things like bees, everybody loves bees. They maybe don't want to hang out with them all the time, but what else?
But they don't seem to mind killing them based on what's happening to bees.
Yeah, it's like, I'm sorry you don't. I'm sorry that someone told you that dandelions were ugly. Like, they're really great. What else? Yeah, so I think the three things that really, really catch me are the way that education has been weaponized to continue the status quo, the ecological implications of just talking about it, and we'll figure out something that lets us continue to have economic growth. And it's like, well, you can, but it's and the destigmatization of mental health. Those three things really grabbed me and have grabbed me the longest. I'm a little ashamed to say that only recently have I realized the insidious depth behind the way that our communities are policed and imprisoned.
But also when you're speaking out against those systems, there can be strong homeostasis that brings you back towards the center by how people respond to you. There are some powerful forces that can be at work in those ways, I would imagine.
Yeah.
And my question is, have you faced some of those? And if so, how do you respond to that?
Thankfully, I have yet to really encounter much direct opposition. I think, unfortunately, I mostly just get ignored. And if I do run into opposition, the way that I have found, or at least I'm looking forward to finding, is asking questions and truly seeking to understand where people are coming from. I've been tossing around this idea that nobody chooses the stories that they get told as a kid. I know I didn't. And at some point, it should happen, but it doesn't always. But you have a moment where you get to choose to tell that story again or not. And my hope is to encounter people telling those stories and ask them, where'd you hear that? Who told you that? Why do you think someone might tell you that? And honestly listen. That's really hard. That's really hard to honestly listen to somebody share a dark fable that was written by people who wanted to separate rather than bring together.
In some of our earlier correspondence, you mentioned that your writing is about decolonizing your mind and being open to the full experience of what it means to be human beings. Can you tell us something about why that's been so important to you and your process in doing that?
Yeah, so we kind of touched on it a little bit in my educational philosophy, and it's it is devastating sometimes to realize that a lot of the stories that I was told as a kid that were supposed to help me be successful actually just fed into a deep anxiety and just general dissatisfaction and a lot of self-loathing about not being perfectly on time to everything, or just all these little things that are just small by themselves, but when you look at how each of these things have contributed to this pattern in our society that just like winds everybody up into these little balls of, if I can just make enough money to get rent and pay a medical bill, and maybe this week I'll go out twice for something to eat, and it's a realization for me, my process of minimizing my interaction with capitalism. I live in this and I can't change it. But I can purchase art from my friends. I can build networks of community outside of social media. I can abandon the idea of absolute perfectionism and release 2 EPs and an album in the space of a year. I can abandon the idea that you have to follow this really rigorous gatekeeping when it comes to releasing music, because I just want it to be accessible to my friends, and I want them to be able to listen to it because I love them, and I love writing music that helps everybody feel better and hopeful. And I can release music when I feel like releasing it, and then later I can go back and say, that's a little too jaded for where I am now, and I can just rewrite it and re-record it and re-release it, and yeah.
When you use the term decolonize, that suggests to me that there has been somewhat of an outside oppressor that comes in and has sort of taken over, and that decolonizing means to be able to separate yourself, to liberate yourself from that which had colonized your mind. And so I'm curious, have you found your music being helpful in engaging your process in that separation?
Very much so. I think that, oh my goodness, there's so much about growing up in the church and being told that my anxiety was a result of a lack of faith. I was deeply colonized by this sort of the church will cure you type of thinking. And I'm not here to discount anyone else's experiences, but I will say that those moments of looking at the American evangelical church and being involved with that and seeing the ways that money was seen as the love of God, and seeing the way that we'll help you as soon as you do this. So this idea of this sort of like imperial church that has dogmatized the idea of just helping has been something that I have been rooting out. And just sort of watching my mind and going back through all these things about the American dream and all these things about the way that you should behave in a professional work setting, and all these things about just the way that we've been trained to view the system as a whole, and watching those thought processes. Like the same way that after living in Bend for a while, I watch the little green plants come up here in the spring, and I'm so happy for all the green, and I'm so happy for these thoughts that are coming in my head. And then I see it send out just a little stalk, and it kind of bends over, and that's cheatgrass. And just going out and just like, nope, sorry, you were beautiful and you were green, and I grew up with you, and I loved thinking these things because it made me feel better about myself, and it made me feel like I was successful because of the way that I engaged with the systems that I was taught to engage with. But then observing them and seeing like, oh no, that's deeply rooted in racism, or oh no, that's deeply rooted in just this normalized bigotry or classism or any of these things, and just being like, someone told me that story as a kid, and now I'm an adult, and I can choose the way that I behave, and I can choose the actions that I undertake, and maybe they're cheatgrass too, but I don't think that asking someone what size pants they are after they tell you they need pants and then just giving them pants is, I don't think that's cheatgrass.
Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know where you're at religiously right now, but has it been a struggle thinking about it in terms of how certain aspects of religion has colonized your mind? Has it been a struggle for you to use a different metaphor, but not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and to be able to discern what's baby, what's bathwater?
Yeah. I feel like my whole life I have been standing around with a bunch of people and being like, has anybody seen the baby? Has anybody seen the baby Jesus? Because all I see is muddy water. And a part of me feels like I dove in, grabbed the baby, and ran because they were drowning it. I feel like there was a brief period in college. I'm not sure if anybody else has done this and gone to college and decided to leave everything that they ever grew up with. But the whole time there was always this still quiet voice in my head that said, Jesus said love your neighbor. That tracks, So yeah, I'm not worried about throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because to just take this metaphor to like a little strangeness, the baby's always been right here. Yeah, I don't think I ever really felt like I needed the church to follow Christ.
Coming from a religious background, that can push against some beliefs of others who were close to you, perhaps, that have to be negotiated.
And that's been something else. Recently, I have been having to reconcile these very strong opinions about, what it means to follow Christ, and also, what it means to what it means to like see the church in the way that it is doing good. There are so many good things coming from the church, and then there's also bad. It's almost like it's made out of humans, and it is, and it kind of goes back to that that dedication to trying to be true, but also kind and also helpful, even though I just want to scream and just be like, Jesus said, give away all of your belongings to the poor and follow him. You being rich does not mean Jesus loves you. But then it's like, oh man, that's probably just gonna upset them. So like, what do I, how, where? Yeah, so.
And you bring it to your music?
Yes, I do. That's kind of the only way I can bring it. I'm trying to talk to people, and I'm doing an okay job, but it's much easier for me to practice saying something to a melody for a cumulative 20 hours, and then just be like, all right, here's 4 minutes on my opinion about this subject, and that's kind of the only way I can be sure that I'm being true to myself.
Mm-hmm. You've been going through some transitions lately.
You could say that.
Anything you'd like to talk about?
A big part of decolonizing my mind has come from recognizing that from a very, very young age, I have always appreciated the deeply feminine sides of life. And so with my upbringing, I put that away because it was not conducive to engaging with a church that conveniently ignored the scriptural basis for there being no man or woman, for we're all one in Christ Jesus. But I gotta say that I'm so thankful for the part of Bend that is so LGBT plus affirming. It's really something powerful to walk up to your new workplace and see a little flag in the window that says you are welcome here, and it's all of the colors, and just be like, and start to relax into my own skin for the first time in like 20 years.
Do you notice it as much as I would think you would?
This is where a lot of that like rewriting of songs energy is coming from, is because there was this deeply performative mask of normalized masculine behavior that I was doing, like really ironically. I've always had like kind of a cynical wit, and I just kind of feel like I'm the same person, but I don't have to be ironic about it anymore. And so there was a lot of terror in the last year. My lovely wife worked for Evoke Wilderness Therapy, which is a great program, but it necessitates going out for 8 days and living in the desert with people who need very strong boundaries. And so during the pandemic, I was just alone in my house with the dog and just sitting and thinking and watching the ants growing some plants and realizing that there was this deep part of myself that I was just putting away. And it would be like, it was like, what was it like? It was like taking half of your face and keeping it in a drawer your whole life. And only letting people see you from one side. And having to stand just a certain way. And having to talk in just a certain way. Because you've only got half your face. And then realizing that you're in a place and that you have a loving partner and loving parents and loving in-laws and an affirming workplace and a very strong network of friends, and just being like, oh, I can have my whole face. I can show all these parts of myself instead of like halfway referring to like, ha ha ha, ha ha ha, isn't it funny that I think and act and feel this way as, you know, a white cisgendered male, ha ha ha. And it's so freeing. And now I'm realizing what I need. I'm realizing what it means to write and sing songs that are deeply cynical, when actually I want everyone to realize that we are all living on the same planet, and that we all need to be connected with one another and listen to each other's stories and just be broken and whole together. And yeah.
I would think when you talk about previously so much being performative, that would be exhausting.
Yeah. I mean, it was like plays within a play. And then within a play, because I would go on stage as a role, and it was almost like being on stage was a break, because then I could just like, no, I am being a character, and then I would come off of stage, and then I would have to reintroduce myself to not being the fullest part of myself. And I don't have to do that.
Are you surprised by how much freer you feel now? Or no? Were you hoping that would be your experience, but not sure, not having done that before?
I had deep fears about abandonment and deep concerns about what people would say, and that is something that I've struggled with my whole life. And a couple months ago I realized that I could obsess about what people might say, or I could obsess about what people said. And neither of them are particularly great, but one of them can actually be examined in good faith. And that was so freeing. That moment when I realized that there's something important about my anxiety, because it's speaking to something being wrong. And I don't know if anyone can honestly tell me that there's nothing wrong. Now, there are plenty of things right. And by lifting this weight off my shoulders I feel free in my ability to move in the world in a way that is true and kind and helpful to myself.
Can you tell me, and I hope you don't mind my asking, but the impact on your relationship with your partner?
She's wonderful. She's so great. And just every time I started, stepping a little bit further, we were able to talk and communicate. And that's the one thing about our relationship that we have this thing where we tell each other that we're like, oh man, sometimes we get sad that everybody else in the world doesn't get to be in our relationship in like a weird way, because it's so unbelievably wholesome, because she's just the most lovely person. And all that's to say is that it wasn't just like sunshine and daisies the whole time. This is a huge life transition. Your husband is now your partner, maybe your wife, your partner. Like, it's just this wild time. And the one thing that really stuck out to me was I was, starting to have like a low-key panic attack, and I was talking to her. I was like, Jamie, I am terrified that me exploring this deeply feminine side of me is going to ruin our relationship because you didn't agree to marry someone who wasn't a man. She looked at me and she said, I don't remember that being in the vows. And I just melted. I just absolutely melted in that moment.
How has family responded, biological family?
Well, let's just say that as far as Dad goes, my old name was Junior. So he's been... I've been really trying to just hold grace, going back to those no, Dad, I'm not American Psycho. Yes, Dad, I like painting my nails. Yes, Dad, I love you. And then it's that holding a lot of space for Dad. Mom has told me my entire life that she would love me no matter what, even if I threw her keys in the ocean. And I was like, even if I wasn't a boy? And she was like, I'm going to need a little bit of time to think about it, but yes. And yeah, the wildest one was my grandma, who raised me in the American Evangelical Church, and I was really nervous, really nervous. Did that thing where I was obsessing about what she might say, and then I was like, well, it is healthier to obsess about what she did say. So I talked to her, and I think it is absolutely fair that anybody that you talk to about these things is gonna need time, and the catch is whether they take it or not, whether they take the time to really think about it. And so we talked, and I told her that my gender expression is female because it feels right. She's like, okay. And I learned that she called me the next morning. She said, what'd you think I was going to do? Stop loving you? And again, I melted because I was like, Grandma. So, yeah.
Yeah.
It's been really...
And I think that you've been talking about this, but one of the questions I have based on a little correspondence we've had, and that is, in this process, you say you've learned a lot about taking people as they are and working to hold space for those with love in their heart, but bad habits in their hands and mouth. And I guess I'm curious about how you've approached that challenge and what you've learned about others and yourself.
So the the best way to describe it is bringing my teacher energy. There was something interesting about before I came out as a trans woman. There was this thing where, like, whenever I was in a space that I was having to be a man, I just, like, was very critical and anxious and just like, somebody's gonna find out. Somebody's gonna find out. But in the teaching space, especially at Camp Tamarack, I was just serene because I was just Fisher Cat, and I was just like, it seems like you are enjoying swinging that very large stick around. Have you thought about how what would happen if you hit someone with that stick on accident? Like, oh, no. And I'd be like, okay, cool. So, can you take like 20 steps that way? And that's a really poor analogy because I would not let a child continue to swing a stick. But just like trying to like make space for like, what can I say yes to? And so that energy of what can I say yes to? What can we agree on? What can we talk about that is going to bring us together? And if we disagree, I desperately want to know why you feel this way. Who told you that? And, you know, I've been doing some reading, and I've found that, you know, this, that, or the other happened. What do you think about that?
Have you been surprised by your own reaction? I mean, I know clearly one knows oneself, but much of that is based on the experiences that one has had and thinking back on that. Now, with the changes that you've been making, even though you may have thought, but you've got no experience with that until now. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious if what you're, if anything, surprised by about yourself, or what you found out about yourself, or what are the parts that have allowed you as a person to have personal growth with this? Mm-hmm. Are there certain things in particular that you've been learning about yourself through this process?
Yeah. This is always an interesting thing, because there's these conflicting things where it's, I deeply identify with this thing that society has labeled feminine, and that doesn't mean that it's feminine necessarily. But it doesn't change that we've all coded it that way. So kind of like realizing that, like, at some point it doesn't matter to me, and it shouldn't matter to anyone if I'm leaning into any particular stereotype of femininity or masculinity or androgyny. Like, there's no, the whole point is that it doesn't affect the way that you should interact with people. Yeah, I think that the one of the biggest things about realizing that it's a free country and I can do whatever I want is no longer being anxious about any particular thing, whether it is traditional masculine or feminine. Yeah. Just realizing that it's all things that need doing, so better get it done. I really thank my grandmother for that energy of just like, I grew up with just me and my little sister, and the strongest old lady I ever met in my whole life, and didn't matter what it was, needed doing. So you do it.
In that correspondence, you ended by saying, with all that in mind, you've been working particularly to raise up the heroes of our time that you think are showing us the way forward. And so my question is, who have been those heroes for you, and what is it about them that makes them so?
Well, I kind of touched on it before, but particularly there is a Christian group in Tucson, Arizona called No More Deaths. And they were leaving aid for people in the desert, and the executive branch, the policing force of our United States, ticketed them, fined them, arrested them, and they went to court and were found to be within their constitutional rights of practicing freedom of religion. And it's like, that's it. That's it. That's a spiritual practitioner seeing the truth of human suffering and putting the reduction of that suffering before whatever law exists. And if that isn't Jesus versus the Pharisees, then I don't know what is. Who else? I am particularly proud to know a local group of people, one of which is John Riggs, who just raised, I think, over $10,000 to purchase a garbage truck, because we've been doing a lot of houseless outreach, and the first thing that anybody says is, it's dirty, it's messy, there's garbage everywhere. Well, I feel like you don't want to have, this is me talking to the person, I feel like you don't want to have like a big conversation about how they didn't invent that garbage. It's just part of our system. But that's fine. My name's John. I'm going to buy a garbage truck and I'll go around and clean it up myself. And it's just like, yo, that's incredible. Who else? There's another local woman named Stephanie Hunter who believes deeply that the way that we teach our children is not in their best interest. And instead of ranting about it on Facebook, she's running for school board. And that kind of stuff. People who are standing up. People who are in groups like the Healing Justice Collective that's just recently started in here, that is full of Black and Indigenous, Latina, Asian American folks that are historically underserved, and they put out a call, and now they are sharing amazing online resources with people to help them love themselves and love each other more. And the queer community here in Bend, I'm very excited that I'm currently on the path to becoming a drag queen, and there's a woman named Alex. You might find her as Deborah Autry. There's a long-standing tradition in the drag community of having just fantastic names. She goes by perhaps Deb Autry. She's great, and she's my drag mom. And I would absolutely not be as confident in doing all of this, and if I did not know her. And so, just like these people that are willing to look inside and say, what is true to me? What is the kind and helpful thing to do? I keep coming back to that. That comes from like a Buddhist practice that I came into. And it's just that idea of like trueness, kindness, and helpfulness in that is just like incredible.
Neat. So, you've got 3 albums out, do I understand correctly?
Yeah, I've got Wild Spaces, which is an EP about the healing powers of the natural world and the way that we need to look long and hard at the way that we're very quickly destroying it. I've got another EP called A Heart is a Heavy Burden, and that's all about how I realized that I care. And that no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't turn it off. I couldn't stop. I couldn't just like continue doing what I was doing after I learned how it was affecting people. And so realizing that a heart is a heavy burden, and it's got a lot of my like story, intergenerational trauma, and so just recently, and this one is I love it a lot because it has my most fiery words on it, and you know I go back to Emerson, who said, "Speak what today feels in hard words, and speak again in hard words tomorrow, what tomorrow feels, even if it contradicts everything you said today." Which, you know, connects with Jesus saying, "Because you're neither warm or cold, I spit you out of my mouth, because you're lukewarm, you're tepid." So, Join or Die is not very tepid at all. And it's got some real bangers on it. One that I'm particularly proud of is the 3rd track, which is I Bet You Would Have Called the Cops on Jesus. And it's all about Christian culpability in the oppression of people of color. Because Jesus was a person of color killed by an imperial state. But I do bring it back around to that true, kind, helpful at the end with the song Something Impossible, which is this idea of like, I might not be able to do anything about all of it, but I can do something about some of it.
I hope people who are listening and watching will also listen and watch to your concert. Just absolutely outstanding guitar work and such a beautiful voice. If people are interested in checking out your other music, where can they find it?
Well, probably still, because there's a lot of housekeeping to do when you change your name and your gender. You can find me on any streaming service under Matt Puccio Jr.
Very good. Well, I hope that
me.
people will continue to listen to you. You've got a lot to say, and in your music also you say it so beautifully. Thank you, Matti, so much for joining us. It's been a real privilege and honor for me to be hosting you today.
It's been such a pleasure for me to be here. Thank you.